On the runway, a Boeing 747 stood ready for takeoff. Thick fog had covered the airport, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The pilots advanced the thrust levers, switched on the aircraft's lights, and the giant jet began accelerating down the runway. Within moments, the aircraft had crossed the critical decision speed, the point at which aborting the takeoff becomes extremely difficult and often more dangerous than continuing. Everything appeared to be proceeding as planned. Then, through the dense blanket of fog, a dark shape slowly emerged ahead. It was another Boeing 747. The second aircraft was on the very same runway, moving in the opposite direction. The distance separating the two massive jets had shrunk to only a matter of seconds. What happened next was so devastating that even imagining it is difficult. But the real question is, how did such a catastrophe become possible? What was happening inside the control tower? And how could a series of seemingly minor mistakes combine to create the deadliest accident in aviation history? This tragic event took place in Spain's Canary Islands and is remembered today as the Tenerife Airport Disaster. Welcome back. To understand how this unimaginable tragedy unfolded, we need to go back to March 26, 1977, one day before the disaster. That day, Pan Am Flight 1736, a Boeing 747 jumbo jet, departed from Los Angeles on a transatlantic journey. After a scheduled stop in New York to pick up additional passengers, the aircraft continued toward its final destination, Las Palmas, a vibrant city in the Canary Islands. The flight had been chartered for holiday travelers and was completely booked. Many of the passengers were older tourists looking forward to boarding a cruise ship and enjoying a relaxing vacation under the island sun. Las Palmas, the capital of the Canary Islands, lies off the northwest coast of Africa, not far from Morocco. Although part of Spain, the islands are renowned for their warm climate, stunning landscapes, and year-round appeal to international visitors. However, beneath this image of paradise, tensions were brewing. In the late 1970s, the Canary Islands were facing political unrest linked to a separatist organization known as the Movement for the Self-Determination and Independence of the Canary Archipelago, MPIAC. No one boarding those flights could have imagined that a chain of unexpected events was already in motion, events that would soon lead to one of the darkest chapters in aviation history. Meanwhile, Pan Am Flight 1736 had departed from New York's JFK International Airport and was making its way across the Atlantic toward Las Palmas. On board were an experienced flight crew led by Captain Victor Grubbs, along with First Officer Robert Bragg and Flight Engineer George Warnes. They were assisted by a team of flight attendants responsible for the comfort and safety of hundreds of passengers traveling to the Canary Islands. As Pan Am Flight 1736 continued its long journey over the ocean, another aircraft was preparing for departure hundreds of miles away. At Amsterdam Airport in the Netherlands, KLM Flight 4805 was getting ready for its own trip to Las Palmas. Like the Pan Am aircraft, it was also a Boeing 747 carrying holidaymakers eager to begin their vacations. The cockpit crew was headed by Captain Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten, one of KLM's most respected and highly experienced pilots, accompanied by First Officer Klaus Mers and Flight Engineer Willem Schroeder. After boarding was completed, KLM Flight 4805 departed from Amsterdam and headed south toward the Canary Islands. Unaware of each other's fate, both jumbo jets were now on course for the same destination. At the same time, events were unfolding at Las Palmas Airport that would dramatically alter the course of the day. Two individuals approached the airport terminal and placed a bag near a flower shop before quietly leaving the area. Hidden inside the bag was an explosive device fitted with a timer. Shortly before the explosion, airport authorities received a telephone call. The caller claimed responsibility on behalf of the MPIAC, the separatist organization seeking independence for the Canary Islands. A warning was issued that a bomb had been planted inside the airport. The caller warned authorities that an explosion would occur at Las Palmas Airport within the next 15 minutes. Airport officials reacted immediately. Security teams began evacuating passengers and staff from the terminal, racing against the clock to clear the area before the threat became a reality. Then, exactly as warned, a powerful explosion ripped through the airport. The blast caused significant damage to part of the terminal building, sending shockwaves through the facility. Although the swift evacuation helped prevent a greater tragedy, airport operations were brought to an immediate halt. All departures were suspended, arriving flights were cancelled, and aircraft already en route to Las Palmas had to be diverted elsewhere. Around this time, KLM Flight 4805 was approaching Las Palmas. Air traffic control informed the crew about the security incident and instructed them to divert to Tenerife Airport, located roughly 110 kilometers away on a neighboring island. After approximately 25 additional minutes in the air, the KLM Boeing 747 landed safely at Tenerife Airport during the early afternoon. At nearly the same time, Pan Am Flight 1736, arriving from New York, was also nearing Las Palmas. Its crew received the same instructions and altered course toward Tenerife. Soon, several other flights destined for Las Palmas were being redirected there as well, making Tenerife the unexpected center of increasing air traffic. What made the situation more complicated was the airport itself. Tenerife Airport was relatively small and not designed to handle the sudden influx of large international aircraft. Located in a mountainous region approximately 2,000 feet above sea level and close to the Atlantic Ocean, the airport was particularly vulnerable to rapidly changing weather conditions. Moist ocean air frequently drifted toward the surrounding mountains. As these air masses rose and cooled, thick clouds and patches of dense fog could form with little warning. Sudden changes in visibility were a normal occurrence in the area. When the Pan Am and KLM aircraft first arrived, weather conditions were favorable and visibility was good. However, as time passed, fog banks began moving across the airfield. Visibility would sometimes drop to only a few hundred meters before improving again moments later. The constantly changing conditions created an increasingly challenging environment for both pilots and air traffic controllers. At that stage, no one knew how long the delay would last. Passengers were allowed to leave the aircraft temporarily to stretch, relax, and recover from their long journeys while airport authorities awaited further updates regarding Las Palmas. Since the aircraft was scheduled to return to Amsterdam after completing its stop, the captain decided to refuel at Tenerife. The reasoning was straightforward: if Las Palmas reopened soon, refueling there could cause additional delays. Fuel trucks were brought alongside the KLM aircraft, and the refueling process began. But just as preparations were underway, news arrived that Las Palmas Airport had resumed operations. The disruption caused by the bomb threat appeared to be over. Unfortunately, the sequence of delays, diversions, and decisions made during those crucial hours had already set the stage for a disaster that no one at Tenerife Airport could yet foresee. Once Las Palmas Airport reopened, passengers from the diverted flights were called back on board. The crews began preparing for departure, hoping the unexpected delay was finally coming to an end. However, another problem had already emerged. Because KLM Flight 4805 was still in the process of refueling, the limited taxiing space at Tenerife Airport had become partially blocked. Unlike major international hubs, Tenerife was a relatively small airport equipped with only a single runway, one main taxiway, and a compact apron area connected to the terminal building. The sudden arrival of multiple large aircraft, especially several Boeing 747 jumbo jets, was highly unusual and placed enormous strain on the airport's infrastructure. As a result, Pan Am Flight 1736 was unable to leave its parking position and proceed toward departure. Air traffic control instructed the crew to remain near the terminal until KLM had completed refueling and cleared the way. Later that afternoon, KLM finished taking on fuel, and the crew prepared to taxi for departure. But the congestion on the apron created yet another challenge. Several aircraft occupied areas that restricted normal ground movement. To manage the situation, controllers issued an unconventional set of instructions. The KLM crew, positioned on the western side of the airport, was directed to taxi onto the active runway itself. They were told to proceed all the way to the eastern end of the runway, perform a 180-degree turn, and position the aircraft for takeoff. After KLM Flight 4805 began moving, Pan Am Flight 1736 received its own instructions. The American aircraft was told to follow KLM along the same runway but exit via a designated taxiway before reaching the far end. This would allow the KLM jet to depart safely once Pan Am had vacated the runway. Unfortunately, conditions were steadily deteriorating. Dense fog continued drifting across the airport, reducing visibility with each passing minute. In some areas, crews could see relatively clearly. Moments later, they found themselves surrounded by thick mist. KLM eventually reached the end of the runway, completed its 180-degree turn, and lined up in the correct direction for takeoff. Meanwhile, Pan Am continued taxiing behind them, searching for the assigned exit point. The crew successfully identified the earlier taxiway intersections, but locating the correct turnoff proved increasingly difficult in the worsening visibility. What seemed like a minor delay in ground movement was about to become a critical factor in the chain of events unfolding at Tenerife. Within the fog-covered runway environment, every instruction, every assumption, and every second would soon matter more than anyone realized. One possible reason the Pan Am crew missed the assigned exit was the layout of the taxiway itself. The designated turnoff curved back toward the apron at an angle that made it difficult to identify, especially in rapidly changing weather conditions. Adding to the challenge, Tenerife Airport lacked some of the visual guidance systems commonly found at larger airports. Several taxiway markings and signs that could have assisted pilots in locating runway exits were either limited or not as prominent as they needed to be. As Pan Am Flight 1736 continued down the runway, passing the earlier intersections while searching for the correct exit, another critical exchange was taking place. At the opposite end of the runway, the captain of KLM Flight 4805 contacted the control tower regarding departure instructions. What followed was a series of misunderstandings that would have devastating consequences. Because of the thick fog, controllers inside the tower could no longer see either aircraft. Compounding the problem, Tenerife Airport at the time did not have ground radar capable of tracking aircraft movements on the runway. The controller then began providing KLM with its departure route instructions, detailing the course the aircraft should follow after becoming airborne. However, during this transmission, no explicit takeoff clearance was issued. Inside the KLM cockpit, though, the message may have been interpreted differently. The KLM captain responded with a phrase indicating that the aircraft was in the process of departure. The exact wording remains a subject of discussion, with reports differing on whether he said, "We are now at takeoff," or "We are taking off." The controller replied with an acknowledgement before continuing the communication. Moments later, the tower transmitted a crucial instruction. KLM was to wait and remain on standby until an official takeoff clearance was given. It was an extremely important message. The meaning was clear: do not begin the takeoff roll until further authorization had been received. But tragedy was unfolding through an unfortunate coincidence. At almost the exact same moment, the Pan Am crew, still taxiing along the runway and hearing the ongoing radio conversation, transmitted their own message to inform the tower that they had not yet vacated the runway. The two radio transmissions overlapped. As a result, a loud interference sound blocked portions of both messages. Inside the KLM cockpit, the critical instruction to stand by for takeoff was either partially obscured or not heard clearly at all. The combination of dense fog, limited airport infrastructure, ambiguous phraseology, and simultaneous radio transmissions had created a perfect storm of confusion. Within seconds, the situation was about to reach the point of no return. Inside the KLM cockpit, the overlapping radio transmissions were received as little more than a burst of static. The crucial message instructing the crew to wait for takeoff clearance was never clearly understood. Meanwhile, Pan Am Flight 1736 had unknowingly passed the intended taxiway exit. Air traffic control contacted the Pan Am crew and instructed them to report once they had successfully cleared the runway. The pilots acknowledged the instruction and continued searching for a suitable exit through the thick fog. By this point, however, the captain of KLM Flight 4805 had already advanced the thrust levers. Believing that takeoff authorization had been granted, the aircraft began accelerating down the runway. Inside the cockpit, KLM's flight engineer raised a concern. Having heard part of the previous radio exchange, he questioned whether the Pan Am aircraft had actually vacated the runway. For a brief moment, uncertainty entered the cockpit. But whether due to miscommunication, assumptions, or the pressure of the situation, the takeoff continued. Visibility had deteriorated significantly, with crews able to see only a limited distance ahead. Then, through the dense fog, the Pan Am pilots noticed a pair of bright lights emerging from the mist. At first, they assumed the KLM aircraft might be stationary. Within seconds, they realized the horrifying truth. The other Boeing 747 was moving directly toward them at high speed. The Pan Am crew immediately attempted evasive action, desperately trying to steer away from the impending collision. But there was almost no time left to react. The KLM aircraft rotated in an attempt to lift off, but the maneuver came too late. The underside of the departing jet struck the upper section of the Pan Am aircraft. The impact tore through portions of the fuselage, causing catastrophic structural damage to both planes. The KLM aircraft crashed back onto the runway, skidding before erupting into a massive fireball. Having recently completed refueling, it was carrying a substantial amount of fuel, intensifying the blaze almost instantly. For those on board, the situation became unsurvivable within moments. On the Pan Am aircraft, confusion quickly turned into panic as passengers struggled to understand what had happened. The front sections of the plane sustained devastating damage, while other areas of the cabin provided a narrow window for escape. Despite the chaos, smoke, and spreading flames, some survivors managed to find openings in the damaged fuselage. Others jumped from the aircraft onto the runway below, risking serious injury in a desperate attempt to save their lives. In the midst of the thick fog and confusion that had engulfed Tenerife Airport that afternoon, one of the darkest moments in aviation history had just unfolded. In the aftermath of the collision, a number of passengers aboard the Pan Am aircraft managed to escape through openings created by the impact. Others leaped from the damaged fuselage onto the runway below, risking serious injuries in a desperate bid for survival. Out of the hundreds of people on board Pan Am Flight 1736, only a small number ultimately survived. By the end of the tragedy, 583 lives had been lost, making it the deadliest accident in the history of commercial aviation. Investigators later examined the cockpit voice recorders recovered from both aircraft. Those recordings helped reconstruct the final moments leading up to the collision and revealed that the disaster was not caused by a single mistake, but rather by a tragic chain of events. The investigation highlighted several contributing factors: the bomb threat at Las Palmas Airport, the subsequent diversion of numerous flights to Tenerife, the congestion at a small airport not designed to handle such traffic, the refueling delay involving the KLM aircraft, the rapidly deteriorating weather conditions, and Pan Am's inability to locate the assigned taxiway exit in the heavy fog. However, the official findings ultimately concluded that the KLM crew initiated takeoff without receiving an explicit clearance from air traffic control.